Who would think that family members would fight over the disposition of a loved one's body? But I can tell you that over the years, we've seen this happen multiple times. We all can remember Casey Kasem, America's top 40 for years. He was very famous, but he had a mixed family. He had kids from a first marriage, I believe kids from a second marriage, and he had a surviving spouse. So after he passed away, there was a dispute between who could make the determination about where Casey was going to be buried. There was litigation, there was lawsuits. I mean, there was just bad blood going on. Eventually, the surviving spouse takes Casey to Norway and buried him in Norway. Now, mind you, this happened like 5 years ago. And here we are in 2019. And recently, I believe there is still a lawsuit going on in the West Coast. And in June 2019, something was reported in the paper that one of the daughters, when they win the lawsuit, they're going to want to get Casey's body exhumed and brought back to the West Coast and brought back to the United States. Typically, we don't see these situations when there's not blended families and surviving spouses who might have been around for a number of years. In Casey's case, there was allegations of whether there was elder abuse or things like that was going on. And I'm not here to talk about that, but I've been involved in disputes over the disposition of the body multiple times. I can tell you that a few years ago, I was involved in a case that ended up going into litigation, not about the disposition of the body, but the fact that the person who was the personal representative and power of attorney went ahead and took care of the funeral arrangements, and then the kids got angry and there was some dispute about what was going on and whether this person handled the burial arrangements and who was going to pay for the burial arrangements, whether it was going to be a life insurance proceeds or whether the power of attorney or the executor of the estate. And so there was a whole bunch of strife over what was going to happen and what was going to be the funeral arrangements, whether it was going to be cremation or burial or mausoleum or all those things. Well, in the state of Indiana, we have some rules regarding that. And there is a matter of priority in our state law. And our state law says something to this effect, that the first thing we're going to look at is we're going to look at the estate planning documents. And if the estate planning documents goes ahead and gives the authority to somebody, whether it's a will, power of attorney, some document, healthcare power of attorney, gives the authority to somebody to make that decision, then we will abide by that decision. So that's the first layer. The second layer has to do with whether there's a Department of Defense form that is filled out, and that's usually for folks that are in the military or have to do with the Department of Defense. The third person in priority would be the surviving spouse. And a lot of times this can come into play and can be a problem in a situation like Casey Kasem because the surviving spouse was not the mother of the children. So the surviving spouse is next. If there is no estate documents, no surviving spouse, no Department of Defense form, the next is adult children. And if there are multiple adult children of the decedent, then there has to be a majority of the adult children. And then if there are no adult children, then you would go and look to see if any of the decedent's parents are still alive, and they would be able to handle disposition of the body. And then if the parents, it goes down familial lineage, it could be siblings of the deceased person. If there's no siblings, you can take it one down, kinship one down further and look for cousins or aunts or uncles that can determine disposition of the body. And finally, we get to a point where if there was a prearranged funeral, the funeral can home can make the determination over the disposition of the body. So believe it or not, sometimes this becomes a really a strife between families, and whether it is really where the body's going to be, or just a matter of control, or what is going on with the dynamics, nobody knows. But this can cause people a lot of heartache. This can go ahead, if somebody goes and cremates the body quickly, then the other people might be saying, well, what are you trying to hide? What are you trying to cover up? So it's really, it really would be the best that you would have some type of documentation in your estate planning documents, given the authority to somebody. Typically, it'll be your surviving spouse. If your surviving spouse is not around, then your adult children. Or you might appoint one adult child, or you might appoint somebody who's a confidant or a trustee in a trust. Or if you appoint somebody, the courts or the funeral home are going to go ahead and acknowledge that they have the authority for disposition of the body. These are things that we sometimes don't think about, but it's funny how things can go on. And again, if you just look at the Casey Kasem case, it's been going on for years. It's cost thousands of dollars. And I know it's, not probably about the body, and the body is just a symbol of the strife that is going on between the kids and the surviving spouse, and what transpired over the last few months or years of his life. Because if you remember, there was some issues about, being in one assisted living facility or nursing home and then going to another one, and whether there were problems like that. So I'm sure it has to do about control. So one way to nip this all in the bud is have this in your estate planning documents. If you have any questions about an estate planning matter in Indiana, you can always give me a call. I am Guy DiMartino. Have yourself a great day.